Hi, I'm Manfred. On Thanksgiving, my parents called me ungrateful, right to my face in front of the entire room. But that wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal had been building for years, like the time they emptied my college fund to finance my stepbrother's big opportunity, or the way they edited me out of the family montage, like I had never existed at all. I stayed quiet about it for a long time, longer than I should have, but not anymore. That night, I arrived 38 minutes late, not by mistake, but deliberately. I figured if I slipped in after everyone had already filled themselves with wine and stuffing, maybe I could fade into the background and avoid the usual performance. I should have known better. The moment I stepped through the front door of my father's house, the house I had grown up in, though now it looked nothing like it used to, everything paused, just for a fraction of a second, long enough for me to notice the shift in the room. That subtle change in the air, the delay before greetings came, the glances that flicked toward me and then quickly away. People smiled politely, but their eyes didn't follow through with it. My stepmother Marlene walked over toward me, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floor, arms spread wide in a hug that felt rehearsed. "There she is," she said, sweet as syrup. "We were just talking about you." Liar. I let her wrap her arms around me for a quick half hug that smelled like expensive department store perfume, and something tighter underneath it. Control. Across the room, I spotted Beckett standing with two of my uncles and a church friend, laughing loudly like he was the host of the evening. He raised his whiskey glass toward me, casually, the way someone might acknowledge a distant acquaintance he barely recognized from years ago. I scanned the room, searching for Sel. She stood by the kitchen island, laughing brightly, her smile perfect, her posture relaxed. She looked completely at home in the space. I didn't. They had transformed Thanksgiving into some kind of showcase. The dining room table was arranged like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Golden leaf decorations, personalized place cards, polished silverware, even a dessert station with a lineup of pies I'd bet money Marlene had hired someone to stage the entire setup. Nothing about it felt real. Nothing about it felt like family. It looked more like branding. As I moved toward the dining room, I caught fragments of conversation drifting through the air. Someone discussing a real estate deal, Beckett's recent promotion, Harlan's speech at the Veterans Hall. Not one single person asked how I was doing, though I hadn't expected them to. Eventually, Marlene tapped her wine glass with a fork and stood up, smiling. "Before we eat," she said, "I just want to take a moment to share how grateful I am for everyone in this room. This year has been difficult in many ways, but look at us. We're still here, stronger, closer, and more united than ever." My jaw tightened. She turned toward the long table and lifted her glass. "Let's toast to this wonderful family, to those who show up, to those who contribute, and yes, even to the ungrateful ones." Laughter exploded across the table. My ears rang with a sudden rush of blood. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly who she meant. No one objected. No one tried to soften it. They simply raised their glasses and drank. I left mine untouched, staring down at the empty plate in front of me, wishing I had never bothered coming. My father, Harlan, cleared his throat and shifted the conversation, the way he always did, brushing past conflict as if it were invisible. "Turkey's ready," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "3 kinds of stuffing tonight. Let's eat." I wanted to shout something, anything, but instead I forced the smallest smile and stayed quiet about it. About 30 minutes later, while dessert was being served, things somehow got worse. Marlene had already finished several glasses of wine, and her voice had grown louder. "You know," she said casually to the room, "Maddie's probably back at her place, surrounded by books and cats, when she's not busy lawyering. Isn't that right, dear?" I bit the inside of my cheek. Beckett jumped in immediately, wearing that familiar smirk. Saving the world one angry email at a time. A few uncomfortable chuckles floated around the table, though the room felt tense for a few seconds before everyone quickly pretended nothing had happened. Again, I said nothing. That's how this family operates. They don't sneak around behind your back. They smile while they hurt you. And if you react, suddenly, you're the sensitive one. I lifted my water glass and took a sip, my hand steady, even though my chest felt tight. I glanced around the room again. The entire house had been remodeled. Sleek, modern, neutral colors. Every detail carefully updated and sterilized. There wasn't a single photograph of me anywhere on the walls, but Beckett's face appeared everywhere. Graduations, vacations, business events, ribbon cuttings. His achievements celebrated proudly, while mine were treated like inconveniences. I knew better than to challenge them. Whenever I had tried before, the result was always the same. Harlan letting out that heavy, disappointed sigh. Marlene putting on her mask of fake concern. Beckett smirking while Sel stayed silent. Everyone sticking perfectly to their roles. And I remained the difficult one. The outsider. The person who just couldn't let things go. But something felt different that night. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't grief either. It was a quiet realization. Sharp, cold, and final. I didn't belong here. And maybe that wasn't something tragic. Maybe that realization was the freedom I had been avoiding all along. So I smiled, lifted my glass, not toward them, but toward myself, and made a silent promise. Never again. I set the glass down carefully, with more composure than I actually felt. They didn't seem to notice, or maybe they noticed and chose not to care. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. A moment later, Harlan stood up, tapping his fork against his glass again. Before dessert, he announced, the room instantly falling quiet, out of habit. I'd like to say a few words. After all, it is Thanksgiving. He straightened his shoulders. Family is the foundation of legacy, he said, staring out across the table. And legacies don't build themselves. They require dedication, sacrifice, loyalty. Marlene nodded proudly beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap. We've taken steps recently to make sure that everything we've built, everything we've worked for, remains in the right hands. My stomach tightened. He never said my name, but the absence hit just as hard. He went on, praising Beckett's expanding business, Cell's successful restaurant, their shared values and commitment to the family vision. There was no mention of the firm I had built from nothing, no recognition of the cases I handled or the people I helped. And those who choose to walk away from family, he added calmly, shouldn't expect family to walk beside them. Beckett's smile spread slowly, like he had been waiting all night for this. Cell stared down at her plate. Nobody else reacted. I wanted someone, anyone, to object, to say that it wasn't fair, but no one spoke. They were all part of the same quiet agreement. Just when I thought the evening had reached its peak humiliation, the lights dimmed again. We have a little surprise, Marlene announced brightly. A video tribute. 40 years of family memories. The screen lit up and images began appearing, one after another. Harlan in his military uniform, Marlene expecting Cell, Beckett playing soccer, Christmas mornings, beach trips, dance recitals, smiling birthdays, holidays. Decades of family history. Except there was nothing of me. Not a single photo, not one memory. A whole stretch of years erased, as if I had never existed at all. And then for a brief moment, a backyard barbecue photo flashed across the screen. There I was in the background, blurred behind the others, nameless, a background figure, a child sitting at the edge of the frame. Someone at the table whispered quietly, "Who's that lady?" My chest tightened. My hands curled beneath the napkin. This wasn't simple forgetfulness. This was deliberate. I hadn't been overlooked. I had been removed. The lights came back on. Applause filled the room. People complimented the video and started chatting again. No one looked my way. I sat there surrounded by smiles that felt like blades, laughter and conversation filling the room as though nothing unusual had happened. I excused myself quietly and stepped into the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. What I saw wasn't sadness, and it wasn't anger either. It was recognition. They didn't fail to see me by accident. They ignored me because acknowledging me meant facing everything they had taken. This was bigger than a missing photo or a careless comment. It was a lifetime of being erased, piece by piece, until I barely existed in their story. When I returned to the table, slices of pumpkin pie had already been served, each piece perfectly cut, topped with whipped cream. Just like every other detail of this carefully staged evening. Nobody asked where I had gone. I picked up my fork and looked down at the plate, but I couldn't taste anything. Because while they laughed and praised each other, I sat quietly with one thought repeating over and over in my mind. I'm not one of them anymore. Maybe I never truly was. I left the pie untouched, excused myself as quietly as possible, and walked down the hallway toward the small guest room they still called the office, though nothing important had ever happened there. I sat on the edge of the futon, still wearing my heels, staring at the beige carpet, and that's when the memories began returning. Another night surfaced in my mind, one that felt painfully similar. My law school graduation. I had walked across that stage alone. Other graduates had rows of cheering parents, siblings holding signs, partners recording videos. My section of seats stayed empty. I told myself they must be running late, maybe stuck in traffic, but they never arrived. Later, Marlene explained, they had dinner reservations for Beckett's birthday. We couldn't miss that, she had said. He only turns 30 once. That moment showed me exactly where I ranked, beneath convenience, beneath their priorities. The sound of applause from that ceremony echoed in my head like a cruel joke, celebrating someone who had no one there to hear it. I opened my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly just to distract myself from the noise in my head. That's when I noticed the old email from the bank. It had arrived months after graduation. The college fund my mother had worked overtime to build for me was gone, completely withdrawn, authorized by Harlan. When I called him, he simply said, Beckett had an opportunity. He needed a push. You're smart. You'll figure it out. There was no apology, no hesitation. The same dismissive tone he used when I was a child and scraped my knee, and he told me to walk it off. When I mentioned it to Marlene, she shrugged. What's done is done, sweetheart. Dwelling on it won't change anything. I took out private loans and worked 2 jobs during my first year of practice. I kept every email, every statement, every record. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed proof. Proof that it had actually happened. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Back then, I convinced myself they made a difficult decision for the family. I buried the anger and forced myself to move forward. Now I understood the truth. It wasn't just one betrayal. It was a pattern repeated again and again, and I had been trained to accept it quietly for so long that I forgot how to call it what it was. They didn't only take money from me. They took my place, my voice, my sense of belonging. I stood up slowly and caught my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back looked calm on the surface, but behind her eyes I could see the fracture spreading, cracks that had been forming quietly for years. I wasn't weak. I had survived without them, built something from ashes they pretended never existed. And tonight, something shifted for good. They wanted a version of me that played along, smiled, accepted crumbs, and called it love. But I'm not that woman anymore. I opened my encrypted cloud folder, one I hadn't touched in years, and skimmed through the old documents. College fund, bank logs, notarized signatures, screenshots of Beckett's startup site from the same month my fund disappeared. I hovered over the contact labeled Delaney. She was the only one in this family who ever treated me like a person. And if anyone still had the guts to speak the truth, it would be her. I tapped her name and typed, "Can we talk tomorrow?" My thumb hovered a second longer than it needed to. Then I hit send. The morning light made everything in my apartment look softer than it really was. I stared at my phone, the silence after that sent message growing heavier by the hour. Then it rang. Cell. I hesitated. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but some stubborn part of me needed to hear what she had to say. Maybe I wanted to give her one last chance. "Hey," she said, all breezy and false, like she hadn't sat silent through my erasure last night. "Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling after, the big dinner?" I laughed once, flat. "Is that what we're calling it? Dinner?" A pause. "Look, I know it got weird." "You knew," I said, cutting her off. "Don't pretend you didn't." There was a long silence. Then she sighed. "Yeah, I knew. I've known for a long time." I closed my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. "And you said nothing? What was I supposed to do, Maddie? Start a war? It wouldn't have changed anything. I just wanted peace." Peace, that word again. "You didn't want peace," I said quietly. "You wanted comfort. There's a difference." She didn't argue, just whispered, "I'm sorry," like it would undo the years of complicity. I ended the call without another word. I wasn't angry, not really. Just done. Done waiting for people to grow a spine. 2 hours later, I stood at Deli's door. She opened it before I could knock. "You came," she said. No surprise in her voice, just something steady, like she'd been expecting this moment for years. I stepped inside, and her living room felt like a museum of things the rest of the family had tried to forget. Old photos, dusty books, a framed letter in my mother's handwriting. Delaney didn't waste time. "I kept everything," she said, walking to a wooden box beside the bookshelf, "because I knew one day you'd come looking for the truth." She handed me a folder. Inside, bank transfer receipts dated 2 weeks before Beckett launch, signatures, account numbers, legal documents, and then my mother's original will. It was right there, clear as daylight. The fund was meant exclusively for my education, not to be touched under any circumstance. I felt the room tilt slightly. "And this?" I asked, holding up a yellowed sheet of lined paper. "Notes," she said. "I wrote them down after conversations with your father, when he started rewriting history. You never said anything. You weren't ready," she said, her voice steady. "But now I think you are." I didn't cry. I thought I might, but all I felt was something settling, like truth had waited, and it had just landed in my hands. Back home, I laid everything out on the kitchen table, scanned every page, matched signatures, checked dates. There is no more room for doubt. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. They didn't forget me. They removed me. One decision, one story, one eraser at a time. I opened my laptop, pulled up my legal notes, and began building a timeline. Not out of revenge, but to remember. to put the story back together the way it really happened. They wanted peace. I wanted the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt steady. No anxiety, no spiraling, just direction. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, I'd be the one writing it. 2 mornings later, a courier envelope slid under my apartment door. No knock, no warning, just silence and pressure. Neatly packaged inside was a letter from Marlon's legal assistant. The language was polished, professional, like someone trying too hard to sound polite while handing you a knife. In the interest of maintaining harmony, it read, Ms. Manfred Renly is invited to voluntarily step away from the family trust and estate planning process. Such a gesture would reflect goodwill and understanding of broader family dynamics. Goodwill? Understanding. They always used soft words to dress up sharp things. I read it twice, then again. Then I printed a copy, pulled out a pen, and signed below the line. I added by hand, I don't want a cent from people who never wanted me. No ceremony, no lawyer, no audience, just truth. I folded it once, slid it into a plain envelope, and left it on my kitchen table. My mind drifted back, uninvited, to a different kind of envelope, one that never came in time. 2 years ago, I was in court when I saw Marlene's name flash on my phone. The text was short. Your mom had a stroke. We're at St. Vincent. No urgency, no context. By the time I arrived, the nurses were changing the linens. I never got to say goodbye. A soft-spoken woman in scrubs looked at me and said, She kept asking if you were on your way. Those words still haunt me. I walked out of that hospital feeling like I'd lost 2 people, my mother, and any last illusion I had about what this family was. Later that night, Marlene told me it was just one of those things. She said I didn't think it was that serious. You were busy with work, and Harland, he never brought it up again. Like grief should come with an expiration date. I've forgiven a lot of things in my life, but not that. Never that. Back in the present, I stood by the window, envelope in hand. The city looked calm, cars humming by, people walking dogs, rain beginning to mist the sidewalks. I held the signed waiver between my fingers. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like relief. For years, I thought letting go would make me weak, that walking away meant I'd lost. Now I knew better. Staying would have broken me. Leaving saved me. I slipped on my coat, walked 2 blocks to the courthouse mailbox, and dropped it in. No tracking, no return address, just a clean cut. I didn't look back, didn't hesitate. I went home, made tea, sat in silence, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't hollow. It was mine. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I sat in a small glass-walled office across from my attorney. A legal pad rested between us, filled with notes I'd been adding for years without realizing it. Receipts, dates, patterns. She flipped through the pages. I brought Deli's documents, my mother's will, and the transfer logs that sealed everything. This isn't a fight, she said, tapping a page with her pen. This is a statement. I leaned back, then let's make it loud. She didn't smile, neither did I. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and drafted one email, just one. But it would land like a bomb. To every blood relative still breathing, every in-law who'd ever fake smile through a betrayal, every lawyer and advisor who'd helped bury the truth. Subject, I thought you should see this. Attached were 4 PDFs, bank statements with highlighted transfers, a scan of my mother's original will, screenshots of Beckett's company timeline, the guest list for that tribute video where my name never appeared. I didn't add a single sentence of explanation. I hit send, and I walked away. My phone started buzzing within 10 minutes. Cousins, aunts, even a second uncle I hadn't heard from in years. Is this real? Why didn't you say something sooner? I always had a feeling. I ignored them all. Harlan didn't respond. Not a text, not a call. Just silence. The same tool he always used when control slipped from his hands. Marlene, on the other hand, didn't disappoint. Her reply was short. This is a family matter. Please retract. No apology, no concern. Just demand masked as etiquette. The queen trying to command the room while the ceiling caved in. I didn't answer. Beckett vanished. No calls, no texts, no passive-aggressive subtweets. Total blackout, which meant he was scared. Good. By nightfall, I'd shut off my phone and poured myself a glass of red wine. I stood by my window, watching headlights blur across the wet street. Not because I was worried, because I knew exactly what was coming next. At my lawyer's suggestion, we began preparing a formal complaint. Not because I wanted to sue, not because I wanted the money, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And this rot had spread far enough. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. And this was only the first strike. It started with whispers. A partner at a firm I used to clerk for reached out. Casual tone, not casual content. "Hey Maddie, heard you've stirred the pot a bit lately. Beckett's been calling around, says you're going through something, says you're making things up." I didn't blink. I didn't even blink. He said, "What exactly?" I asked calmly. "That you're unwell, carrying family baggage, that this is some kind of breakdown?" I laughed, quiet, dry. "He's trying to paint me as unstable." "Yeah," he said, "he's shopping the narrative." I thanked him and hung up. Classic Beckett. If you can't bury the truth, discredit the person who speaks it. He was calling favors, leveraging connections, spinning lies. What he didn't realize was that I'd walked through fire to get here, and I wasn't stepping back just because he threw smoke. I called Delian. She answered on the first ring. "He's trying to smear me," I said. "He's scared." "He should be," she replied. "I was hoping you'd call. There's something else." 10 minutes later, she forwarded me a file I hadn't seen in years, because she'd never sent it. It was a scan of a formal HR complaint from my first job out of law school. I had forgotten about it, or maybe I'd forced myself to. Back then, I thought it was paranoia. I thought I was imagining things. A missing draft, a leaked pitch. The timing had been too perfect, but I couldn't prove anything. Until now. Delene had saved everything. Email headers, screenshots, even the log showing Beckett had logged into my personal computer using a remote access app I'd stupidly left open, all while he was helping me set up my home Wi-Fi during a holiday weekend. He had stolen my ideas and pitched them as his own to a competing firm, and it had nearly tanked my career. Delene's voice cracked slightly. "Your father made me promise not to tell you, said it would only make things worse." I regret listening to him. I thanked her, but I didn't call my lawyer. I called a journalist, a woman I knew who had built her career on stories just like this. Truth wrapped in betrayal, scandal sitting beneath silk ties and trust funds. She didn't ask for proof. She just said, "Send everything by morning." The headline was already making its rounds. Finance exec accused of corporate theft. Source alleges family cover-up. Within hours, Beckett's firm went into panic mode. Clients started pulling contracts. His face vanished from the company website. His Instagram went private. Harlan tried calling twice. I let it ring. Marlene left a voicemail that was so on brand, I almost laughed. "You've humiliated us. I hope you're happy. This family supported you, and this is how you repay us?" Supported me? They couldn't even spell my name right on birthday cards. I sat in my office reading emails from strangers. One aunt finally cracked. "I always knew something was wrong. I should have said something too." Too late. I wasn't angry anymore. Just clear. Beckett could spin stories, but this wasn't a courtroom. This was the court of public opinion, and he just lost his jury. That night I got a message from a former intern. She was fresh out of law school when she worked under me. Quiet, brilliant, overlooked, in all the ways I'd been once. Her message read, "Thank you. People like you make room for people like me." I didn't smile. Not really. But something inside me settled. Just a little. They thought I'd set fire to the house. I hadn't even raised my voice yet. The next morning, I walked into the county clerk's office with a folder under my arm and history in my hands. The complaint was already prepared, typed, formatted, and reviewed, line by line. Misuse of trust funds, forgery of consent, breach of fiduciary duty. 3 names sat at the top. Harlan Renly, Marlene Renly, Beckett Renly. Attached were everything they thought I'd never find. Notarized bank records, authorization forms with mismatched signatures, and Delene's signed affidavit verifying the original terms of my mother's will. By noon, the documents were public record, and by 4 p.m. they were accessible to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection and a reason to look. I gave them the truth. What the world did with it wasn't my problem. By evening, Beckett's LinkedIn was gone. His firm had issued a vague statement about a temporary suspension pending internal review, but I already knew what that meant. Harlan's name disappeared from the Veterans Foundation's website, a line added quietly below the board list, pending ethics investigation. Marlene's Hadfinskal, her beloved charity gala. Out of respect for privacy, the statement said. Wrightsell texted me late that night. I didn't know it would go this far. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. You never asked how far it already went for me. She didn't write back. Harland, though, he finally did. The subject line of his email, "You're no longer welcome in this family." There it was, the last brick in the wall they'd spent decades building between us, now handed to me like a souvenir. I opened a new draft, typed, paused, deleted, typed again, and then I didn't send it. Instead, I wrote it out on a notepad and read it to myself. You erased me. Now I'm just finishing the job you started. I closed the notebook and turned off my phone. There was nothing left to say to them. No more defense, no more proof, just distance. The real kind. I sat in my office as the sun dropped behind the city skyline, gold leaking through the blinds. The news sites were still spinning articles, reposts, speculation. But inside, everything was still. Not hollow, not numb, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after you've told the truth loud enough to be heard and no longer care who believes it. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my place. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken, roasted carrots, and a bottle of wine. I didn't pick for the label. Darlene came early with apple pie and her quiet, comforting presence. One of my interns showed up with her girlfriend and nervous laughter, unsure if they were overdressed or underexperienced. A friend from my running group brought garlic bread and stories that didn't involve lawsuits or betrayals. We sat around my kitchen table, small, scratched, real. No place cards, no veiled jabs, no toasts pretending to be compliments. We passed food, we talked about books, terrible movies, inside jokes. There was no pecking order, no power plays. Just people, just connection. After dessert, Darlene helped me rinse dishes. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. Her eyes were steady, proud. The next morning, I drove alone to a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. I brought no flowers, just a letter. I sat at my mother's grave and read it aloud, even though I wasn't sure if I believed in any version of the afterlife. I did it, Mom. I kept my spine. I kept your name clean. I'm not in their house anymore. I'm not under their thumb. The wind moved the leaves around my boots. I folded the letter and tucked it beneath the stone vase, weighted with a small rock. I didn't cry, I just breathed, and then I left. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail I didn't need to listen. I saw the name before I deleted it. Marlene. I pressed play anyway, just long enough to catch the tone. You got what you wanted. We lost everything. I hope you're proud. I stopped it, deleted it. That wasn't pride she heard in my silence. It was peace. They thought I wanted to take something from them, but the truth was simpler. I just needed to get myself back. That night I sat in bed with a cup of tea in a quiet house. I looked around at the space I'd built. Not perfect, not pristine, but mine. I thought about everything they took, and then everything I reclaimed. Some of the wounds would never heal clean. That's not how it works. But they didn't have to. I didn't need closure to move forward. I just needed clarity. I wouldn't fill the empty places with people who only showed up to take. I chose solitude over illusion, truth over tolerance, peace over pretending. I chose me. They called me ungrateful, but I'm more grateful than ever. Grateful that I finally walked away. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I spent years trying to earn a place at a table that was never built for me. Tried to prove my worth to people who had already decided who I was. But here's what I've learned. Peace is not given, you create it. Family isn't about blood, it's about respect, truth, and safety. And healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means release. If you're carrying weight that doesn't belong to you, let this be your permission to set it down. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to rewrite your own story. And you don't need anyone's approval to start. So now I'll turn it to you. Have you ever had to walk away from a version of family to find yourself? Do you believe silence keeps peace or just prolongs harm? If this story hit close to home or helped you see something more clearly, drop a 1 in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Tell me why. I read everything. And if you're still here, still listening, don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories that speak truth, stir hearts, and remind us we're not alone. Until next time, take care of yourself like someone you love.